Friends, today we will discuss the evolution of democracy in Northern Europe. As you know, our discussion is based on Robert Dahl's book on democracy. It's chapter 2, part 2 of chapter 2. In part 1, as you remember, we have discussed the evolution of democracy in the Mediterranean Europe, Mediterranean region. Today we are discussing the evolution of democracy in Northern Europe. And we have discussed the systems of popular government in Greece, Rome, and Italy, which are all in the Mediterranean Europe. They all lacked several of the crucial characteristics of modern representative government. They did not have the system of representation. It was direct democracy. It was direct democracy. Classical Greece was composed of popular local governments. Medieval and Renaissance Italy was also composed of popular local governments, but they lacked an effective national government. There was no national government. There were city-states, small states. And Rome had just one local government based on popular participation. Rome was a big empire, but again, it has a local government in Rome, and it controlled the whole of Roman Empire. But it did not have any national parliament of elected representatives. There was no MPs or MNs. There was no members of parliament. From today's perspective, absent from all these systems were at least three basic political institutions. Three basic political institutions which we now have now, they were absent at that time. Number one, which were those institutions? Number one, national parliament. Number two, elected representatives. Number three, popularly chosen local governments that were ultimately subordinate to the national government. A system combining democracy at local levels with a popularly elected parliament at the top level had yet to be invented. So at that time, this system had not been invented, which we now have. We have now local governments at the union council level, at the tehsil and district levels. These are the local governments. Then we have governments at the provincial level. And at the top, we have the national governments. Okay? At that time, in ancient Europe, this system was not there. There were only simple one-tier governments. This combination of political institutions originated in Britain, Scandinavia, the lowlands in Scotland, and elsewhere north of the Mediterranean. Lowlands, the region of Scotland lying south and east of the Highlands. The patterns of political development diverged widely among these regions. So, there were popular governments in these regions, but their patterns were different. A highly simplified version would look something like this. In various localities, freemen and nobles would begin to participate directly in local assemblies. This fan is making noise. Tick, 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 tick. Please turn it off. You can use that one if you like. In various localities, freemen and nobles would begin to participate directly in local assemblies. To these were added regional and national assemblies. These assemblies consisted of representatives in Northern Europe. They invented representation. some or all of these representatives would come to be elected. So they started elections. They started electing their representatives in Northern Europe, not in the Mediterranean Europe. Local assemblies. In Norway, there is a town named as Steinkjer. Steinkjer. Steinkjer is near the city of Trondheim. Trondheim in Norway. There is a boat-shaped ring of large stones. Boat-shaped ring of large stones. At this place, Viking freemen regularly met from about 600 Christ era to 1000 Christ era. You know, understand Christ era? After the birth of the Christ, CE. So at this place, at that ring of large stones, Viking freemen regularly held meetings from about 600 CE to 1000 CE. Here, they would hold an adjudicative assembly. Adjudicative, where disputes are decided. Adjudication is done, okay, where judges sit and decide the disputes. So there was an adjudicative assembly. In the Norwegian language, this assembly was called a ting, T-I-N-G, ting. It was a Norse word. Norse is the language of the Norwegians. Norwegian language is called Norse. Norwegian language is called Norse, N-O-R-S-E, Norse. So this assembly was called a ting. Similar places can be found elsewhere in the vicinity. Ting means the thing of the people, common thing, commonwealth. So similar places can be found elsewhere in the vicinity. By 900 Christ era CE, assemblies of free Vikings were meeting in the Trondheim region. Trondheim region. Such assemblies were also meeting in many other areas of Scandinavia. You know Scandinavia? Which is the Scandinavian region? Which countries are located in the Scandinavian region? Finland. Speak. Repeat. Finland. Norway. Any other? There are more. There are more countries which are located in the Scandinavian region. They are small countries. Huh? I think so. So such assemblies were also meeting in many other areas of Scandinavia. The ting was typically held in an open field. The ting, the assembly, it was typically held in an open field. There were no big halls and big parliament buildings. So they would meet in the open. It was marked off by large vertical stones. Large vertical stones. At the meeting of the ting, the freemen settled disputes. The freemen would meet over there and they would decide the disputes, settle the disputes. They discussed, accepted, and rejected laws. So laws were also made in the ting. Laws are also made in the ting. And laws were also, how did they make laws? They discussed, and accepted or rejected the laws. They adopted or turned down a proposed change of religion. So the ting would also decide the religion. If assembly decided to change the religion of the country, then the whole country would change the religion. As they did when they accepted Christianity in place of the old Norse religion. So when they switched to Christianity, the decision was made by the ting, by the assembly. and even elected or gave their approval to a king. It was another function of the king, of the assembly. What was the function? They would they would elect their king, and they would approve the election of the king. The assembly would approve the election of the king. King was often required to swear his faithfulness to the laws approved by the king. So, king was bound to approve the laws which were approved by which are made by the assembly. The Vikings knew little or nothing about the democratic and republican political practices 1,000 years earlier in Greece and Rome. Now, the Vikings in Norway, in this region, they were not well aware of the democracy which existed thousands of years back in the Mediterranean region, Mediterranean Europe. They seem to have created assemblies on their own. It looks that they created the assemblies on their own. They invented themselves. They did so operating from the logic of equality. Logic of equality. So pay attention that Robert Dahl again and again he is mentioning the logic of equality. It is the foundation of all democracy, equality, political equality, equality of the citizens. It is the basis of democracy. So here again in Scandinavia, in Norway, they did so operating from the logic of equality and invented democracy. And they applied the logic of equality to free men. Only free men were equal. Others were not equal. The slaves were not equal. And women, again, unfortunately, women, they were not equal. They did not have the political rights. The idea of equality was alive and well among Viking freemen in the 10th century. In the 10th century, the idea of equality was alive, and it was well established among Viking freemen. It is attested to by an event. There is an attestation, there is a proof that the Viking freemen believed in equality. What is the event? What is the proof? Some Danish Vikings were traveling up a river in France. Some Danish Vikings. Danish means who live in Denmark, who belong to Denmark. Danish. Danish means what? Who belong to Denmark. Some Danish Vikings were traveling up a river in France. Someone asked them, "What is the name of your master?" Someone asked, "What is the name of your master?" What did they reply? Yes, none. We are all equals. Yes, we have no master. We are all equal. It means we are all free. But we must resist the temptation to exaggerate. Robert Dahl is warning us. We must resist the temptation to exaggerate. We should not exaggerate. We should not understand that equality was all over there and it was quite perfect. No, it is not the case. Some problems are also there. The equality that Vikings boasted about applied only among free men. Even free men varied in wealth and status. Even free men, they have different status and different levels of wealth. Beneath the free men were the slaves. So slaves were not considered equal. The Vikings possessed slaves like the Greeks and Romans, or for that matter, Europeans and Americans centuries later. So the Vikings also had slaves. Among the slaves were enemies captured in battle. So who were the slaves? Number one, the enemies who were captured in the battle. Number two, the hapless victims of raids on neighboring peoples. The tribes, the armies of countries, they would raid, they would attack the neighbors, and they would capture their people and made them slaves, hapless people. And number three, among the slaves were persons simply bought in the ancient and ubiquitous commerce in slaves. There was trade of slaves. There were markets of slaves. Okay? People were sold at the shops. People were sold. Men and women and children were sold. People could go to a shop and they could purchase a man, they could purchase a slave, they could purchase a lady. So at that time, so among the slaves were persons simply bought in the ancient and ubiquitous commerce in slave. Ubiquitous means everywhere. It was everywhere. When slaves were freed, they remained dependent on their previous owners. So the unlucky slaves, even when they were freed, when they would become free, they could not stay free. They survived upon their previous owners for their sustenance. For their sustenance. And the slaves were a caste below the free men. Slaves were a caste below the free men. Above the free men was an aristocracy. Above the free men, aristocracy, wealthy people. Aristocracy composed of families with wealth and hereditary status. They had higher status. Wealth was usually in land. So at that time, there were no factories. There was no industries. So wealth was usually in land. At the top, there would be a king. Above this aristocracy and all others, there was a king. Power of the king was limited by at least three things. Power of the king was limited by at least three things. Number one, his election. So no one could become king on his own. The king had to be elected. The king had to win election. Then he could become a king. So number two, his obligation to obey the laws. His obligation to obey the laws. He was bound by laws. Number three, and his need to retain the loyalty of the nobles and the support of the freemen. So he was just like our prime minister. The king was in this democratic systems, in this democratic governments, their king was like our prime minister. In spite of these severe limits on equality, the class of freemen was large enough. The class of freemen was large enough. There were many. The class of freemen could impose a lasting democratic influence on political institutions and traditions. So the freemen, they could influence the politics, political traditions, political institutions, they could influence. Among free men were free peasants, smallholders, and farmers. They were the free men. Free peasants, smallholders. Who are the smallholders? Who have small pieces of land. Smallholders. They are not feudal lords. Feudal lords have large pieces of land, okay? Large land holdings. Smallholders have small land holdings, okay? And farmers. In several other parts of Europe, local conditions also sometimes favored the emergence of popular participation and government. So far we have talked about the Mediterranean Europe, the Northern Europe, but in other parts of Europe, local conditions also sometimes favored the emergence of popular participation in government. Free men engaged in pastoral activities. What are the pastoral activities? Pastures, pastures where there's a lot of green grass, and people take their animals, their sheep, their cows, their goats for grazing. They're called pastures. There's a lot of green grass. So pastoral activity. This activity is called pastoral activity. Pastoral is adjective of pasture, related to pastures. So freemen engaged in pastoral activities in the high mountain valleys of the Alps. You know Alps?
Alpine mountains. Yes, sir.
What is this?
So these are mountain ranges.
Yeah, it's a mountain range in Europe. Alps is the biggest mountain range in Europe. Such condition provided them a measure of protection and autonomy. Raetia. Raetia was an ancient Roman province. Later, it became a Swiss canton. First, it was included in the Roman Empire. Later, it became part of Switzerland. A modern writer describes Raetia around 800 CE. In Raetia, free peasants found themselves in a uniquely egalitarian situation. Egalitarian, you know egalitarian? Believing in or based on the principle that all people are equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities. Musawat, egalitarianism, equality of humans. These free peasants were bound together by their common status and by their common rights of usage over mountain pastures. They developed a sense of equality. So those farmers, those who were busy, who engaged in domesticating goats and cows and other animals, they had a sense of equality, that all of them had equal rights to go to the pastures and benefit from them and graze their animals. This sense of equality was wholly at odds with the hierarchical, status conscious thrust of medieval feudalism. So, before that, there was feudalism in the medieval period. So, in the feudal culture, there was no equality, there was hierarchy, and there were different people had different status. This distinctive spirit was to dominate the later emergence of democracy in the Ratian Republic, Ratian or Ratian Republic. So, since there was a sense of equality among the people, it led to the emergence of democracy in Ratia. The huh? Sorry?
So they're saying that is enough.
No. Let's complete this chapter. The midterm exam is approaching, and we have not studied much. So let us complete this chapter. From assemblies to parliaments. From assemblies to parliaments. Later, the Vikings ventured westward to Iceland. So it means Iceland is in the west of Norway. Okay, and this other parts which we have discussed. So the Vikings ventured westward to Iceland. They transplanted their political practices in Iceland. In several localities, they recreated a ting. So in Iceland, they recreated a ting, but they did more. First, they created a ting in Iceland, but they created something more than the ting. What was that? The foreshadowing the later appearance of national parliaments elsewhere. What they created, it was like our national parliaments. In 930 CE, they created a sort of suprating, the all thing, or national assembly. First, there are only the city assemblies of the cities at the local level. But then they created a national assembly, all thing, suprating. This national assembly remained the source of Icelandic law for 3 centuries. 3 centuries. This National Assembly worked in Iceland. Meanwhile, in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, regional assemblies developed. Regional assemblies. Regional assemblies which were above the local assemblies. Then developed national assemblies as in Iceland. So we can imagine that the regional assemblies were like our provincial assemblies, and the national assembly was like our national assembly in Islamabad. Subsequently, the power of the king and the centralized bureaucracies under his control grew. Grew means increased. Grew, grown. It reduced the importance of these national assemblies. So after 300 years, after 3 centuries, the kings became more powerful and the assemblies were weakened. Assemblies became weak. But these national assemblies left their mark on later developments. For example, there was a tradition of popular participation in the assemblies in Sweden during the Viking period. This tradition of popular participation led in the 15th century to a precursor of a modern representative parliament. It happened when the king began to summon meetings of representatives from different sectors of Swedish society. Now, just think why the king needed to summon the assemblies? Robert Dahl is explaining. The representatives came from nobility, clergy, burghers, and common people. These meetings eventually evolved into the Swedish parliament. So, Swedish parliament was established. Environment of the Netherlands and Flanders was radically different. Here, the expansion of manufacturing, commerce, and finance helped to create urban middle classes. So, in these regions, Netherlands, what is the new name, the old name of Netherlands? Anybody knows the old name of Netherlands? Holland. Its old name was Holland. Many Pakistanis still call it Holland. Many Pakistanis still call it Holland. They don't know its new name. So Netherlands and Flanders. Environment here in these regions was quite different. The expansion of manufacturing, here industry increased. Industry developed. Manufacturing, commerce, and finance helped to create urban middle classes. Urban middle classes. These urban middle classes composed of persons who commanded sizable economic resources. So they had some good economic resources. They were financially well. Rulers perpetually starved for revenues. So before emergence of the middle class, generally there would be an upper class and the lower class, the poor class. So with the emergence of the industrial age, industrial revolution, the middle classes flourished. Middle classes flourished. And they could pay the taxes. The poor class cannot pay the taxes. Aristocracy can pay the taxes, and the middle class can pay the taxes. So the rulers, the kings, they needed taxes to run the state. So for this purpose, they would summon the meetings of the parliament. So they could not ignore this rich class, and the rulers could not tax this rich class without gaining its consent. So against their will, the rulers could not tax them. To obtain consent, rulers summoned meetings of representatives. So these people, they had their representatives in the parliament. The representatives were drawn from the towns and the most important social classes. These assemblies and parliaments were often called as estates. There were different estates in the parliament. They did not evolve directly into the national legislatures of today. They established traditions, practices, and ideas that strongly favored such a development, that strongly favored today's legislatures. Meanwhile, from obscure beginnings, a representative parliament was gradually coming into existence. In the centuries to come, that representative parliament would exert far and away the greatest influence on the idea and practice of representative government. This was the parliament of medieval England. So it was a very important development in the history of evolution of democracy, the establishment of the parliament in England. It was a product less of intention and design than of blind evolution. So it evolved. No one has had a planning behind it. It evolved with the passage of time. The English Parliament grew out of assemblies during the reign of Edward I from 1272 to 1307 in the 13th and 14th centuries. These assemblies were summoned sporadically. Sporadically means off and on. Sometimes they were summoned, sometimes they were not summoned. Sometimes there were meeting sessions, sometimes there were no sessions of the assemblies. They were summoned under the pressure of need. So the kings, they did not like the parliaments because parliament shared power with them. They were check on the power of the king. So basically the kings did not like parliaments. But why did they summon the parliaments? Because they wanted the consent of the middle class and the aristocracy for taxes, to impose taxes. The sessions, the meetings of the parliaments were called. Getting the point? Are you getting the point? There's no response. Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
So, how Parliament evolved from these beginnings is a lengthy and complex story. By the 18th century, however, that evolution had led to a constitutional system. Constitutional system. All of you know constitutions? What is a constitution? Constitution. What is the relationship between a constitution and law? What is the difference between a constitution and law? Constitution is a fundamental law, the basic law. Repeat with me. Constitution is a basic law.
Constitution is the basic law.
Repeat again. Constitution is a basic law. Basic law. So all other laws have to be made according to the Constitution. If any law is made which is not according to the Constitution, it will be rejected. It will be nullified. It will not be accepted. Okay? That is why Constitution is called a fundamental law, a basic law. In this constitutional system, the king and parliament were each limited by the authority of the other. Within parliament, the power of the people in the House of Commons offset the power of the hereditary aristocracy in the House of Lords. The laws enacted by king and parliament were interpreted by judges. So there was a king, the executive, there was the parliament, the legislature, and there was a judiciary. So these are the three pillars of the state. Though by no means always, the judges were mostly independent of king and parliament alike. So most of the times, mostly the judiciary was independent. In the 1700s, this was a seemingly marvelous system of checks and balances and the separation of the powers within the government. Checks and balances existed among the country's major social forces. This system was widely admired in Europe, this system in England. It was admired, it was liked in Europe. Among others, it was lauded by the famous French political philosopher Montesquieu. Montesquieu was a French philosopher. He also liked this English system, English parliament. It was also admired in America by the framers of the Constitution. Framer, who frame, who prepare. The people who prepared the American Constitution, they also liked, they admired the English Constitution. Many of the framers of the Constitution in America hoped to create a republic in America, but they wanted a republic that would retain the virtues of the English system without the vices of a monarchy. The republic they helped to form would in due time provide something of a model for many other republics. So, with this, we conclude this chapter. If you have any questions and comments, I think we have time.